with us. So thank you for joining me today. As I mentioned to a couple of people, I will post slides and tweet that out afterwards. So feel free to connect with me at Lynn Winter MN, that's right, Minnesota. Also, if you don't see me on LinkedIn as well. But this talk is all about avoiding the problems and the roadblocks you hit from getting content from A to B. I wish I could see you guys all in person. I'm from Minneapolis, so it would have been great to, bring you here and see you, but hopefully you're safe and happy and enjoying maybe a cocktail while you watch this, which we could never do in person. So again, my name is Lynn Winter. I'm a digital strategist. I'm a freelancer. So for about 3 years now, I've worked with different agencies across the country doing user experience, content strategy on information architecture. I also do some project management consulting, and I run a conference for project managers, which is now online, as it would be happening in August. So if you're a digital project manager, you might want to check out Manage Digital. That might be a good fit for you. As we go along, guys, I will probably not be likely able to follow the chat, but we will have about 10 minutes at the end for questions. And if we run out of time, feel free to ping me after that. So here's just a couple of pictures of all the fun things we did in the last year. I always include these on slides, and I'm like, oh, what have we done since, say, March? Well, we got a dog. We got a dog named Moose. He's the Boston Terrier. We haven't let him figure out how to walk downstairs yet, and so he's kind of trapped in the house. But I did what any respectable human would do and started an Instagram account for him. So if you're in that kind of thing, that's what our life is mostly about: work, children, and Moose these days. So let's just get on the same page about what content strategy is before we get started. It's the means, like this is my favorite definition, there's a lot, but essentially getting the right content to the right people at the right time in the right place. And that kind of breaks down to being substance, the content, structure, the pieces and the components of it, the workflow of getting the content through the process with people, and then the governance of that. And so that's kind of, that's when you are building a content strategy, that's what we're talking about. But it turns out this is not a talk about content strategy. Well, not really, right? This is the talk about the point of when we go from this train station to that train station and all those things that throw us off the tracks. And we want to mitigate those essentially so that we can get our best work done, we can get done on time, and we get to the end, right, and on budget. So that's what we're gonna talk about. And there's 5 areas that I've kind of found in my work that are the problem areas that you might be experiencing. So the first one is the ecosystem, like the quantity and size and dealing with that. The next one is around content and it being user-centric. Managing the internal politics, right? Always a fun thing. What do we do with people that aren't writers? How can we make sure that they are provided tools? And establishing a process to get from A to B. So we're going to jump into all 5 of those. I apologize in advance. I like to talk really fast. So I'm going to just run with it and then we'll have questions at the end. So the first one is simplifying the content ecosystem. The challenge here is that essentially there's a lot of stuff. Nobody really knows what's there and no one's really managing it. And so if we don't deal with the volume or the unknown at the start of the project, it's going to take us and cause us problems all the way through the end. So there's 3 things I like to think about and how to simplify that ecosystem right off the bat. The first one is about setting standards, understanding what content is valuable to you in that project with the organization, and then doing an inventory of the scope, which may change depending on what you're doing. And then also the step of actually removing the content, getting rid of things and purging. So the first step is around removing or defining the standards. Essentially, as an organization, before you even start to look at content, you want to be thinking about what makes content valuable for us. And it really depends where you are at that moment, how you've prioritized your users and what you're trying to achieve and what shape your site is in. And so together you need to define those standards. And I think I'm always on the agency side, but whether you're in-house or agency, you need to kind of recommend something. So you just can't go to the group and be like, okay, let's define our values. Walk in with some things that you can talk about and then define that together. Here's an example of a scale that I've used. And I've like, a lot of my work has turned into like remote workshops, right? And like, what does that look like? So here's an example of something I sent to a higher education client and had them do on their own. And I was like, basically, listen, we can't decide that everything's tens, but based on this project, here are some things I think you should consider. Now tell me where you're at in the level. And it was really helpful. They had a couple tens, a couple threes, and a couple fives. And there we used this thing going forward to decide how, when the content matched this, if it fit or not, or if it could go. But essentially, there's a couple buckets of areas I like to present to clients. And you can kind of change this up, but this is a nice way to think about it to send that off to them. So the first one is, does the content support the organizational goals? Does the user actually need it? Do they want this content, or are you just putting it up there for yourselves? Is it getting any traffic? Is it regularly being updated? Now, this content's been sitting there for 4 years and nobody is like claiming it, let it go. Is it getting in the way of things? Like if you have a couple core prioritized users, is it just kind of like in their space and they don't want that and therefore they can't find what they need? Should you be the expert in it? Sometimes we're trying to, be a thought leader in this space and we have a bunch of blog posts about this, but like, should you be that person? Is that your story that you're telling? And then is this the right channel to put it on? There's a lot of clients I'm working with now where they do such infrequent events or they're driving in different ways that we're doing more events off the site because they're smaller and different, and more on like Facebook instead or Eventbrite. And then finally, is the content inclusive and accessible? Now, this doesn't cover all the things, but this will get you started and going in the conversation so that when you look at a piece of content, you need to kind of pick, okay, well, it's not getting traffic. Well, that might be okay, but is it fitting some of these other things? And essentially, I'm a big person when it comes to being a Marie Kondo of it. Like, it really is that simple. Like when you look at it, you're like, why do we have it? Or like, yes, this is great. The user needs this. So maybe bring her in and talk about cutting content. I like to recommend that 50% of the content is cut right off the bat, and I think it can happen. I worked with the Science Museum in Minnesota years back. They got 75%. Now, this site had been sitting around for 11 years, so it was a little crufty, but 75%. And after 2 years, they put one piece of content back on. So it can be happening. And I heard a client a couple of days ago talk about how they went from 20,000 to 500. Now, I feel like he was being kind of generous, and maybe it wasn't that much, but I love it. Like, we can let this stuff go. All right, so once we define the value around it and everyone's on the same page, it's time to inventory the scope. And it comes down to first figuring out what you need to inventory, like what is the gap. So maybe you're working with a company or organization that has lots of domains and instances of Drupal all over the place, or maybe they're not on Drupal, they're all on different platforms. Maybe you need to inventory the content types and components because you're doing a massive restructuring. Maybe it comes down to the page level. So kind of figure out what that is and then figure out what the right tool is to inventory and use that to fill your gaps. I always use the process. I'm like, oh, I didn't know you had this and I didn't understand that. And I also divide the work up. There's certain things that I pass off to a client to do, and I think internally you can share the work. The one thing I think that's super hard is sharing between a document. So if you're going to be the person doing the content inventory, I think you need to own that and do that piece by yourself. So here's a couple examples of things that have been done. This is an ecosystem map. I basically told this foundation, I said, hey, I am unclear of all the things you're doing. And this wasn't necessarily like digital pieces, but this was like their print and their social. And I'm like, a lot of pieces are going around. They're connecting to the website. I'm not sure what it is. And I sent him a couple articles by Scott Kuby, has a couple great blog posts on brain traffic. And it's like, okay, read this. But if he's doing more complicated things, don't make the ecosystem map that complicated. Just tell me like what's connecting to what. And they came back with this most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And for then I said, I'm going to show everyone this, but they connected this by themselves. But it can be as simple as a spreadsheet. I just need to know what's out there and what we should be looking at. Another thing you might want to be doing is a component inventory. So here's an example from university, veterinary school, in which we wanted to see like what's going on. And in this case, it was less like we weren't able to change the components yet, but I needed to know like, where's the consistency going on? Because we're copy editing all the pages and changing them. We should have consistency in what components we're using. So we started taking stock, and this is just 6 of like 50. And so, you know, I put down the URLs, so we always have an example, the fields I see, a screenshot. If you're able to log in, you can pull the exact fields. And this is always helpful, not only for the writing team, but also for someone doing the user experience with wireframes or designs, and they can see have we taken into account for things, or have we decided to let some of this go. Finally, we have the content inventory. This is just an example. It changes depending on what I get access to, but I kind of do it in 1 of 3 ways. 1, I'm doing it by hand, which is painful, and I've done it to up to 3,000 pages before. 2, I talk to my local friendly developer that can pull it out of the system because it's a friendly system. So they do an SCSV of the things I want, which I always like to get, like when things were last created and updated, and you know who the author is, and any great stats on that. Otherwise, there's a great tool called Screaming Frog, which is more of like an SEO inventory tool. And you can connect your Google Analytics to that system and export it. But essentially, I lay it out in what the structure is now. And then kind of the key space is, if you look in kind of the early part of it, the stats column, I always go through the analytics and look for different patterns. And I color code things. So I do green is good, orange is okay, and red is bad. And I do that in order to, when I go back a month later, or if my client sees it, we just know what the color coding means. And that's been really successful. So if you're doing this kind of task, I'd suggest coming up with some sort of color coding system, even maybe for your like notes that you want to come back to. All right, so now we've decided the content scale, we've got an inventory done, and now we're going to reduce the scope. And this is really the process that people need to understand the value of it. Like, we need to remove scope now, so you don't have thousands of pages to read, so we don't have to migrate everything. And we don't have all this technical writing debt long term. And so getting everyone on the same page of why to get rid of it, get the gung-ho, rah-rah situation going on of like, yeah, let's get it, let's move it. And then I, as you know, a practitioner, but even if you're in-house, you know, whoever's doing this, own it, like suggest to people why you should get rid of it, and like what should be gone and why. It's so much easier than telling someone like, here's the spreadsheet, now go figure out what you guys want to keep. Like, I recommend everything, like if we should combine it, we should remove it, keep it. That just takes that extra brain processing off of people's plate. And then I do it in 2 rounds. Essentially, I do like a first purge and a second purge. The first purge, I do it and separate it because I want the homework to spread out. And I also want the thinking process to be different. So the first purge is really just stuff that is like super obvious we need to go. Like, it's past dates, it's 404 errors, page not founds, like those just go. I worked with a client where there was like 2,000 this first purge, and they're like, oh my God, we got to go through this. And I said, hey, just look at the top 50. They did, and they're like, you're right, I trust you, just get rid of them. I don't need to look at the rest. So that made the process go faster. The second purge is stuff that I think for sure should go away, but they need to take a look at that because there's maybe something internal I don't know of why they should keep it. You should also take a moment when you're doing the migration to really get rid of stuff that you don't need. All my lovely developers I work with always say, Lynn, it's not like using Drupal 5 and 6. Like, it's easy to go from 7 to 8 and just push and migrate everything. And I'm like, no, but I don't want everything over there. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. And so this is the time I meet with clients and say, why do we have all these blog posts? Is there a reason we can get rid of some of them? What should we do to lighten our load at this point? And sometimes the developer will move over anyway, and then we'll delete them. But there is this weight we just don't need to pass on to projects. All right, user-centric. The challenge here is that we don't know who our users are. We don't know, so we don't know what to create for them, but we think we do, right? So we just start creating content for what they think. Or worse, we create content for what we want them to care about. And this is not a field of dreams situation where if we build it, they will just come. We need to for sure understand what they want. And 3 more things to think about. I swear when I started making this presentation, everything wasn't supposed to be in 3s, but it kind of ended up that way. But first, we should take what we know. We don't need to start from scratch and assume we know nothing about the users. There's a lot we know, so we can document it. Then we should research and fill the gaps, and then summarize it and make sure that everybody can use this information going forward, not just for a redesign, but for marketing and social. So to document what you know, I would search out and find the people within an organization that interact with the outside users. These are often people you wouldn't think about. Maybe there's a helpline, people that answer the front desk, maybe there's a department that have a lot of exterior facing and get to hear that feedback. Those people are gold mines of information. And you don't have to meet with every single person. You can write up some questions, or you can just say, hey, what do you get called about a lot? They probably have a list because it's their complaints that they've been trying to fix for a long time. And then sit down at a workshop and figure out what you know. Who are they? How do you connect with them? What challenges do you think they face? And what do you think they need from you? And here's just an example of that activity in a Trello board. This is a great tool. I use Trello for a lot of things, but you can see in the far right or left, that's maybe right for you. We did this in person, right? Where we wrote down all the audiences, and then all the needs are over in the right-hand side where we kind of prioritize them. And then at this point, you can kind of figure out what don't you know. And so it's time to research. And there's 5 kind of things that bubble up for me as ways to kind of reach out to these users. And I think they've changed now, right? Because we cannot go in context and sit with people. Like I worked for Metro Transit. I cannot go sit at a bus stop anymore. I suppose I could maybe, but I don't want to, right? For safety for everybody. So we've got to adjust that. Online surveys are a love-hate thing for me. When you do them, you have to make sure you have a high enough volume. There's a need that they want to spill out, and you got to make sure you're asking questions you don't know the answer to. Early in my career in these, I asked a lot of questions. I'm like, yep, that's what I thought. I'm like, wait, did I learn anything? And I think that's for all of these things, like have a clear purpose of what you want to get out of it, and then make sure the questions pull that out. We just did a school survey on an LMS. I work with an agency that made a custom LMS, and we posed like 2 questions right in the LMS, and man, 2 days went by and we had hundreds of students and parents writing because they have a need, right? They have concerns and questions, and it was super valuable. You can also pull together groups of people that are affiliated with different kind of organizations, so you can have focus groups online. Reviewing the data is great. Google Analytics only gets you so far though, so considering installing something like Hotjar or Crazy Egg to get some heat maps and some scatter maps for that. User interviews, in the initial point, it's sometimes great to talk to specific people that may be clients of who you're working with. Or they're your clients, and get some feedback from them. And then finally, there's a lot of ways to do user testing along the way, from first click to usability testing to tree jack testing and so on, to pull that information in. And when you get to the end of this, it's important to summarize. A lot of people do user personas. I have kind of like a repulsion that happens to me because I've seen so many of like silly Sally likes long walks on the beach and likes to buy her groceries at 10 o'clock. And those things drive me bonkers. So I do something more practical. Maybe it's the German in me and the project manager, but this is an example of what I do for user types, where I try to really document what we know and what we need and how that really connects to what we're doing for the project and the scope of the website redesign. All right, we're in topic 3. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast, but I want to make sure that we can get to where we need to go and have question time at the end. So politics, right? What's the challenge? Well, if their voice isn't heard, it's going to be a problem, right? They might derail the project at the start. They might come in the middle, which we call the swoop and poop, right? You're working on the project, woo, blows up, and there we have it, right? Or it might be a long-term problem. I worked on this project where their website was only like 2 years old, and I got digging in and I'm like, well, I mean, I can see some improvement, but like, man, they've got like 80 components and all this flexibility, and the design's not too rough. And it turned out that marketing led this project and didn't talk to IT, didn't bring in really important voices. And so it was deemed kind of like a disaster and it needed to be redone. So it's really critical, and the impact of not doing this, it can be financially ruinous. All right, we got 3 things again. First, we need to make sure we're hearing their perspective. They know we're hearing it and we're incorporating it, because we're not just doing this to make sure people feel heard. People got some really good information and vision, so we want to make sure we can bring that in. The second thing is we want them to feel part of the strategy, that content strategy and direction of the project at the start. They need to have some sort of stake in it and approve it. And then we need to bring them data throughout. So there's this initial thing of bringing it in, but then there's this constant thing throughout the project of like, what are you doing over there? What's going on? So meeting with stakeholders every 3 weeks to show them what we're doing and then provide real data at critical points. So let's talk about what that looks like. So gaining their perspective is best done, I think, with stakeholder interviews. It's a really fast process. You can get on the phone for 30 to 45 minutes with someone. So it's not an expensive process and people really get their voices heard. I prefer to do one-on-one because I really feel like people just kind of like build this rapport with you and just kind of tell you everything. And when there's a group of people like tiptoe around and it kind of changes the dynamic. So if you can do one-on-one, that's great. And I also think it's an opportunity to fill holes that you have. So maybe you're working internally and you're meeting with the C-suite or different other stakeholders, and maybe you don't know what's going on with the new direction, and it's your chance to pull stuff out. I love to do it because like maybe this field or space is not something I'm accustomed to, and I can pull out information about the marketplace. So it's a great thing to do from that. Here's an example of some questions. It continues to go on the page, but you kind of get the picture. I change this every single time I do a project because I want to include questions that fill in the holes for what I don't know and I can do a better job. I also like to share it with my clients beforehand because it turns out it's the start of the project. I don't know a ton of stuff yet, so that they can make this document a lot better and add a lot of questions to it. All right, so once we've kind of got that, we want to get their approval of the strategic direction. And so typically a creative brief or strategic brief comes out of a workshop, the kickoff meeting. So they're maybe at that meeting, maybe not, but we want to make sure they know that we brought their feedback to that conversation in a nice form of a summary. And then what we want to do is document that strategic brief, right? And get it written down, approved, and pass it around. And if we can include any information around like real data and voices, I'm sorry, for some reason, something in my house is beeping and my son's alarm's going off. So this will go on forever. Can anyone tell me if you can hear that? We cannot hear it. Yes, okay. Wait, you can hear it? Barely. All right, we're gonna go on because otherwise I gotta get up and walk down and it's not gonna be good. All right, so there's a strategic direction. Oh my God, hold on, I'm gonna pause 1 second. I'm gonna scream. Okay. Okay, so we wanna get their approval and know it's there, but we also wanna include real information and data at this point from our users, right? Because we're not just bringing everyone's feedback in, we're gonna show them like what is really happening out there. Because sometimes people have opinions and once they see the real data, they're like, oh, okay, well, that was just my thoughts. But now when we see the real stuff, I get it. Here's an example of what a strategic brief might look like. It's just a snapshot of it. But the 5 core things I want in it is, who they are at the core, like why are they getting up and, out of their bed in the day? What is their mission? What are they trying to achieve? What's their business model? What does their marketplace look like? Who are their users and what do they need, which hopefully we figured out with a different process. And then really, what are we gonna accomplish in this project? What are the goals, the risks, the KPIs? And that gets written down and becomes our guiding post. Now we do have the problem that there are challenges throughout the project of like, why are you doing that? Why is my stuff getting hidden? And because this is like anywhere from C-suite to the professor to someone in a different department, they're all different levels in an organization. And so we need to bring in some data and user testing at some point. So I think when you kind of figured out what your problem is, pick the right solution that will best address their concerns and questions so that they kind of calm down and don't continue to bring that challenge along with the project. And the nice thing is that user testing is great for everything, so this is a bonus for the project. The other thing I've realized is that people don't want like a 20-page report. Like I need it and I would need to go through it, but they want this really nice summary to get the information. So here's a couple of things you might do. So early in the project, like I mentioned, you might want to sell like a hot jar or crazy egg. I always find these super helpful, especially like navigation wise or where people are going on a page. I was just reviewing this for a client and their homepage, like they just drop off literally like past the banner, gone. That's a problem. So that's really good to look at when we start the project at the top to get that information and share that with people. Another great tool is tree jack testing. So if folks don't know what that is, it's a sitemap testing, and Optimal Workshop has a really great online tool where essentially you put in your structure, you ask 10 questions, and it gives you the result of how fast somebody can get there and if they got to the right place. And what I like about this is I like separated into two tests, one for external people and one from internal people. And so when the people are complaining about where their stuff is, we can get results to say, hey, they are getting there, or you know what, you're right, we have the wrong label or it's in the wrong spot. And then of course, usability testing is great. This is just kind of a notes document from that, but once you have something built on your Drupal platform, you kind of walk through it with users and find it. I find that 75% of it is content. They can't find it, they're not scanning. So it's a great thing. They recommend 5 people, but honestly, if you do just 3 people remotely, you can get the bulk of your concerns out right there. All right, we're doing okay for time. The next section is providing tools for non-writers. The challenge here is that either you don't have the budget to hire writers, which I'm in a situation all the time because I work with a lot of nonprofits, or your internal staff doesn't have time or experience writing, but it's on their plate to do, right? So we need to help folks with that. And again, classically, 3 ways to think about that. First, simplify that process of creating the page. Then we're going to help people gather better content to start with. And then maybe we can eke out a little bit of money to get some actual writing help. So the first one is around simplifying the page. And so the challenge really here is that you tell people to go write and they've got to sign these 10 pages they have to write and they're staring at a blank page. Well, what they do is they copy and paste what's on the old site and they start copy editing it. And oftentimes the site is in such bad shape, that's not where we want to start. So I would suggest creating a simple template for people to fill out. In the content strategy space, a lot of people use something called page tables, which I find like that structure is too much. There's often like 15 to 20 fields that people have. Like it's more becomes a checklist. Like I just want the simple things so we can focus on what the page is about and we can start thinking about the structure it's going to take and the content types and components. So here's an example of what I do, and I call them page priorities because I want my clients to really start thinking about what's the priority on the page? How does this page need to flow down? So I ask them to fill out 5 things. Who needs the content? What are the goals of this page? What are the user questions when they come there? What are they asking? What do they need to know? And then what content supports that? And we start to think about what type of component will fill that in. What are we having a banner? Are we having a 3 class with icons? And then where are we going to go next? Where's the next place? So I often fill out like maybe 5 to 10 of these on a project and then send it off. And then the client can use this tool. It's a great tool. Like I'm working with this theater, and they have a whole new community concept going on, trying to figure out how to work remotely. And they're like trying to explain to me, I'm like, I don't really get it. They're like, Lynn, should I do a page party? I'm like, yes, you should do that. And they filled it out and it made perfect sense. And they really understood what they wanted on it. So it's a great tool for that. The next thing is to make sure you get quality content. So maybe you're on a team where you have a bunch of people internally passing content on to you. And it comes in all shapes and sizes. So I think there's 2 ways to attack that. One is to have an editorial content guide, style guide essentially, that they can use. Oftentimes these things are pages and pages and pages and pages long. That's not going to help them. They're not going to look through it. So take that document and make a 1 to 2 page cheat sheet and make it custom to your challenges. Like, I don't care what any other organization is, whatever keeps recurring for you as problems, make sure you tell them how to fix that in that document. So that's one thing to get them started. The next thing is have them submit the content with a submission form that guides them. Here's an example from IEEE, which I found on the internet, which I thought was fun. And I can't even remember what that acronym stands for. And because of this view, I can't see my notes, but it's like an electrical engineering chemical society of some sort. But they put on their form like, hey, Twitter's short. It's 140 character. Like, people kind of know that, but you know what? I bet they got a lot of submissions that were way over 140 characters. So they're getting people to think about it. They're telling them it needs to be conversational, that they need to use an eye-catching photo. These are the things that can kind of just help people that aren't doing the content all the time get that. Also, maybe consistent content to you. Finally, if you can hire someone, if there's $1,000, $2,000 in the pool, there's 3 things I would put the money towards. 1, creating a content style guide, getting that set up for you. 2, having them write 5 to 10 of your top pages that you can then use to cheat from, like copy from and make the rest of your pages, or create your content first and have them copy edit as much as the time allows to get the tone and voice consistent across the pages. So if you can do that, that's what I would set your time and money aside for. It's a big help. All right, finally, we're gonna talk about the creation process. And so much of content strategy is really about project management, honestly. Like, how do we get it done? And so the challenge is maybe that, maybe you've been through redesign before, or maybe you work on your Drupal site all the time, but you're not the person that's in charge of the process, and nobody is. So when you go to writing, you spend like a month just trying to figure out, like, what are we gonna do? Like, where do we put this? What do we do that? And it's like overwhelming. So many clients, I'm like, you haven't started. Well, I was figuring this. Nope, just stop. So the first thing is time box yourself. Get this plan done in a week so you can move on to writing. But there's a couple of things you need to think about when you do it. First, you need to make sure that you've identified a lead. Someone needs to be in charge of this process. It needs to be realistic. Just because we've identified 200 pages to write doesn't mean it needs to be there at launch. So figure out what needs to be done and what you can set aside for later. Keep all your tools simple. Just because one of the writing tools that I've used before is Gather Content, amazing tool. It does not make any sense for 1 to 2 people. It doesn't. It's a team tool. So you got to pick what makes the most sense, because your tool cannot overrun your process. When you have a process, write it down and then implement with authority. I mean, people can have opinions, but we're going to have one way to go and we're going to move on. And then we got to hold our team accountable. And it's not just about calling them out, because you'll need to call some people out, but it's providing help. You meet every single week, you help them. So this might be hard for some people. Maybe they're not called to do this. And let's be honest, like, I have my children downstairs. You just heard his alarm go off. I have a dog running around. Like, it's hard right now. So any support we can give people, virtual hugs is great. So here's what I do. So I'm not internal, so it's really technically not on my plate to do, but I do a workshop and I cover a lot of different things when it's time to write, migration plan being one of them. This is what other thing I talk about. I put forth, here's what I think you should do. And I also say, hey, you don't have to do it, but I'm trying to provide you at least with something versus like a whole of what to do. And then you can go and make your own process. And I think this is great. So anyone out there that is on the agency side, put together what you think is the right process and share that with them, so at least they have something to go off of. So I first talk about the content style guide, which hopefully we've done already by the time we're going to get to writing. I tell people to gather all their media assets right in the beginning. They're approved in the folder all together. It saves them way much more time than pulling an image every single time you want them. They need to create a workflow, talk about how is this going to go from idea to published on Drupal in this specific process. Keep it simple. They need a location to be writing. Are they going to write in Word and Google? Maybe they decided Gather Content's a good option. They got to set deadlines for it. I give them the ultimate due date. The due date is the time they get training. I want all their content done. So they need to work a schedule backwards. They're going to start creating content at some point, right? And then I want them to test it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then, as I mentioned, we really got to monitor and provide support. But there are people you're going to have to hold accountable for. And it's hard because everyone is already working 40+ hours a week. So it's a challenge. That's why if you can eke out a little money for a writer, it's really helpful for that. So let's dive into a couple of these before we wrap up here. But first I wanted to show you, this is just an example for one of my current clients. They decided to use a Trello board. This is actually not how my brain works at all. So this probably wouldn't be my format, but it works for them. They've tagged people, they've color coded it based on where it's at. And they're dragging and sliding things and they're making their content. So this is a very simple tool and might be a good one for you to try out. But to dive into a couple of those items, one might be a workshop around workflow. That might be something that you guys want to do. And it's kind of a simple workshop that can be done in 6 steps. So the first one is when you sit down together as a team virtually, you want to show an example of what workflow means and can look like. So everybody can kind of visually picture what this might be. And then start with one content type, like maybe, a blog post or some critical piece of content, but you can see a clear path for. And then we're going to try to imagine what that can be. And so in person, that might be Post-it notes trying to figure it out. But pull up Trello and make little cards, like here's the steps it's going to be. We're going to assign people to it. And then you hash out where the problems are. How is this not going to work? Why should this be different? Can we simplify this for this process? Always think about the simplification. And then do it with the rest of the content types and make sure you have that set up before you start writing content. Another thing I like to talk about is the testing. There's 4 areas that we want to think about when it comes to testing our content. Accessibility is really critical. It also tends to be the most expensive thing. So if that is a high priority for your project, think about the money that you need to set aside to have the right people testing with people of all abilities. There's also a lot of things developers can do to a certain level, but the actual testing with folks is really important. If you want to hit a certain level, make sure your site is set for that and your content especially. Then findability and comprehension, if people can find things and then process what it is and do something, that can be done with the usability testing. So when you have it in the site, they're doing it, you're going to have some questions specific to that. Readability is really the easiest things. And that's what I tell my clients, no matter what, we're going to do this and just use this tool, readable.com. You can copy your text, you throw it in here, and it's going to give you a grade level. I usually hear around the industry that like grade 4 is great. I tell people grade 6 because I think it's really hard to get there. But essentially what we're trying to do is shorter sentences, scannable chunks, small words. And that's not just good for people that have low reading abilities, but also like for Google and for us, because everybody else, we're lazy. We want to scan and do things like that. So those are the 5 things. I've only left 8 minutes, which I feel absolutely terrible about. But cut down your content, make sure you're reaching your users, manage that politics so you don't have massive problems through the middle, provide the support for those people working really hard to get the content done, and then establish a clear process so that you can get to the end. As we kind of jump into questions, I just wanted to share a couple books that I really like if you're looking for something new to read. A couple of them are some really oldies but goodies, but these are kind of some things I like. And if you're trying to figure out what you want to have in your content process, I think the Content Strategy Toolkit's a really good one. It has lots of different ideas that you can pick and pull from. But if you want to reach me, you can reach me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, the 2 websites are up there, my personal one and the conference one. So I am going to jump over chat. It's been moving the whole time. I have no idea what it's saying is. So how do you balance the need for in-depth UX research with avoiding a too many cooks in the kitchen situation? How do you know what you have enough user feedback? And it just scrolled past. I think the key with that is identifying the authority and lead at the point. So one thing I didn't talk about is when I start any project, we have a conversation about who's the internal stakeholder or the first level stakeholders and second level stakeholders. And I outline what that means. What are the responsibilities? You got to come to all the meetings. You have to review all the documentation. You're going to have a lot of homework. You need to be able to speak for the organization as a whole and not just your Ps. And I outline that. And then I say, okay, but if you don't fit into that, or you don't have time, you can be the second layer stakeholder group. And that means you get to look at things, but you're not going to derail our track. We're going to move forward. We'll certainly take your feedback into consideration, but that might not change where we're going. And so if we outline that and people self-select, that tends to help a lot. And that second level group, I always have my clients meet with them every like 3 weeks, because there's always some sort of document in a redesign that's coming up. And so people tend to just want to know like what's going on and want to know that like you're here to listen to them if they have something come up. It's that, you know, unknown of what's going on there that really just kind of throws people off. So I try to be really direct about like what you're going to have an opinion about or what you're not going to have an opinion out. And then there needs to be a clear person at the end of the day where the buck stops about where the decision is. And then I think there was a question about too much user testing. You know, I believe in an MVP process. Or very lean. And so to me, it's usually maybe 2 items, maybe 3, like at most, maybe there's stakeholder interviews, there's some user research of some sort, and then there's like confirmation when we do usability testing. But if the project budget has it and you get to do more, fantastic. But at some point there's a bloat situation going on with the timeline, and maybe some of that should happen afterwards. Like you can always do usability testing after the launch and get that feedback from there. Slides will be posted. I'll send a link posted on my LinkedIn as well as Twitter. And if you don't see it, ping me. Another question is, I think we talked about that one. Oh, I need to scroll. Sorry, guys. What if you are a public agency and everything becomes a matter of public record? Thoughts on how to thoughtfully let things go? Well, I'm not sure what we're letting go. So I think that is a question. I think it's important. Anything that I've created, I've always known that that can be shared with a client or internal or anywhere, and we would always be okay with it. So I think if you approach projects knowing that you're trying to make the right choices for users and you can document that, I think that can be public. But I can't imagine, Ryan, I don't have that possible standard on most things I do. So I think it's a little tricky, but I think kind of setting out the standards like around accessibility or how involved you need to have the users, explaining to them what your process is up front and posting that, executing on that process and sharing what you have is the best you can probably do. And then, you know, you're still going to get people that want you to do different things. But I think if you're, the goal is supporting the user, I think that's the best approach you can take. We currently have a group in the middle, which gets copy via email and Word docs. Is it worthwhile moving the content creation out of the content originators? This is a large institution. Currently have a group of people. I'm not sure I fully understand that question, Nathan. It's copied via email. So I think you're saying we get it in different places, and it's a large group. So do we want to push that boat and steer it in a new direction? I think the question is, how much burden does that put on you? If they're getting it in different ways, and it's not killing you, that's okay. I also think in a large group, maybe a submission form or a ticketing system might be a good way to go and slowly move people to that. So I think, how much pain would that cause you to live the way you are, and how much is it going to improve going forward? And I hope I answered that. It's just so much harder like this. Any other questions? Still trying to scroll up. We got 1 minute left. How do you, as a content specialist, talk to tech colleagues about the advantages of doing the content work as part of migration? That's a really good question, Hannah. I've actually, since I went freelance, I've been working with different agencies, and I've realized that I started doing things and nobody cared or nobody took them and went with them. And so not only do I have a problem with development team understand and value it, I have it's different at every agency. So I've kind of reached out and started doing like postmortems when I start working with new agencies to figure out what value it is. I also try to be a little more transparent at what I was doing. I was kind of just doing my thing, and the client was finding value and I was finding value, and then it kind of disappeared. And so I tried to say, how can my work translate into a developer's world? And what do I need them to care about, right? Like, I don't need them to care about all the things I'm doing. I need them to care about the things I need them to execute on. So it's a little bit of kind of educating a little, they don't know, and I don't know all the things they do, right? So we got to educate each other, and then kind of just figuring out what works best for them. It's been a little bit of a slower process for me. Scrolling down, there was a design first question above, and I don't know where it is above, but somebody commented that. Would giving a user the ability to search archives for past content migration, the need to let go of content? Ability to search archives for past content migration. I'm not exactly sure the question, Thomas. I took it in two ways. One, like if I can't have my content and it goes away, but I let it go, how can I go back to it? And so one solution I've seen with clients is that we keep their old instance up for like 6 months to a year and see if they need it, and then see if they can let it go. I find that's really helpful with school districts. People panic that they can't just copy and paste something. So we a lot of time leave an old site up there for a while. Another thing could be exporting it into a spreadsheet, and that becomes a tool. But I think the question is, like, why is it a repository? Is that for the user, or is that internal? If it's just an internal repository of content, is there a reason why we should have it on the website? We've got to rethink how we save things and where we're looking for them internally at that point. And I know it's a massive shift, but we need to rethink that process because we don't need to bring that over. I know we are at time, so I don't know if folks want to leave. So I'm just probably wrap this up. Slides. Yes, I will post them. I'll put them on LinkedIn and Twitter after this, guys. Really, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. I love connecting with people, so feel free to reach out to me. No idea where you are at, but I hope you are safe and happy and having a great time. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your DrupalCon.